good to be here together. Good that you have joined us. I just want to say a few words about heaven today and talk about what heaven might mean. It's really pretty fascinating. If you talk to people, not just in the church, but if you talk to people outside of the church and you ask them, what do you think about heaven? Like, what do you think heaven is? And usually people go right away to the afterlife. Heaven means something that lays beyond this existence. But I want to show you one verse in just a few minutes, one thing that Jesus said that points us to something entirely different. That heaven actually is as much about today as it is about tomorrow. Heaven actually is as much about the present as it is about the future. And so I want to ask this question. Simple question. What is heaven? Everybody wonders about it. Where is heaven? What does God intend for heaven to be? And Jesus gives us this simple, it's just one sentence, and it gives us a whole other understanding of what heaven is. And you know the verse. Even if you don't think you know the Bible or that much about the Bible, or you don't know any of it, you haven't memorized anything, you know this verse. And this just changes everything in terms of our understanding of what heaven is. Here's the first question to ask, a little more specific. What is heaven to Jesus? We're going to see what it is to Jesus in this verse in just a minute. I think it's so interesting that, I have a curiosity around heaven in terms of other religions and other belief systems. I would really like to know what Buddhists think about heaven. What is the Buddhist understanding of heaven? What does Islam say about heaven? What's the Jewish understanding of heaven? It's like, if someone isn't a Christian, at least there's this curiosity around what heaven is to different faith systems. So, for Jesus, what is heaven? Well, the first way that Jesus described heaven is that heaven is our home. It's like, now we're talking about afterlife. We haven't got, this is afterlife. That when we, at some point, we're going to walk through a door or a window or a tunnel or whatever you want to imagine it to be, and we're going to enter into something else. And Jesus is saying the first understanding of that something else is, it's like home. It's like God's house. And can you imagine, if we're talking about God's house, it's a building not built by human hands, is what Paul said. Imagine how big that house will be. It's God's house. Got to figure God's house is going to be pretty big. I had this friend who had a friend who lived in Malibu. You know Malibu, just south of LA? All the rich people live in Malibu. If you're watching this and you're living in Malibu, I didn't mean it, but it's Malibu. So my friend's friend had this huge mansion, it was one of the biggest houses in Malibu. And my friend's friend said that he could go anytime he wanted, and he would just have this house all to himself. Because the owner was never there. He said, you can just go. It's like 10,000 square feet. It's this huge, beautiful house on the beach. And you can go, and you can just stay there as long as you want. It's good to imagine these things. What is God's house like? This building built not by human hands. Well, here's how Jesus put it in John chapter 14. My Father's house has many rooms. And I will go and prepare a place for you, and I will come back and take you to be with me. So cool to think about what that's going to be like. Kimberly and I live in Ottawa. We love our house. We just love our little house in Ottawa. Maybe you love your house in the same way. What is this going to be like? It's just going to be on a whole other level. And Jesus said, it's got many rooms. There is this idea taught in the Bible that this life really isn't our home. We think we're at home now, but we're not really at home. And as much as we love our homes, and we all love our homes, and not even just our house homes, but Collingwood, if Collingwood is our home, and we cherish our homes. And Jesus is saying, you love your homes now. I am telling you that when you get to this place, then you'll know, oh man, this is where I belong. This is my home. I love the way Paul puts it. Paul says today we live in tents. For we know that the earthly tent we live in, if it's destroyed, this is what I just read, we have a building from God. And it's eternal. It's in heaven. It's not built by human hands. For while we are in this tent, we groan and are burdened. See, think about a tent. Think about the concept of a tent. A tent is temporary. You don't set up a tent forever. You set up a tent for like a week. And that's what this life is. That's what this body, for Paul and for Jesus, it's temporary. We go camping every now and again. I've talked about, we used to go to the Pinery. With COVID, we didn't get to go last year. The Pinery is down near Grand Bend. And there was a lot of things about that camping trip that we loved because we had time with family. There was 22 of us that went, my siblings and their kids, and we camped. And we loved that part of it, but we just really didn't like the camping part. Like, we just didn't. It's like we just couldn't wait to get back home. We couldn't wait to just get out of that tent. And it's like, we have a house. We're sleeping in a tent, but we have a house. And it's kind of like this Bible message. Like, we cherish this life and we hang on to it so much, and there's obviously so many beautiful things in this life. But Paul's just saying, you know what? Don't be afraid, because there is something waiting for you that is just beyond. God's house is so big that you can't even comprehend what it'll be like. So there will be a day when the tent comes down and we get to go to this place. And when we're camping at the Pinery, that's what we look forward to, taking the tent down and going back home. And that's, as Christians, that's what we look forward to. There will be a day when this tent comes down and it's nothing to be afraid of. We look forward to what God has prepared. What else is heaven like? Just a couple of things. What will heaven be like? Eternal. It's in the Bible, right? Eternal. Wouldn't you love if an astronomer or some kind of physicist was here to talk about what infinity is from a scientific perspective? Like, wouldn't it be amazing just to get because the faith community and the science community, agree that we don't understand what infinity is. But the science community knows it's true. The universe just goes forever. And we can't even understand what that would be like. But in the Bible, this house that God has for us, it's eternal. It just goes forever. One of the first things that I learned about prayer when I was about 11, I think, was thinking about the bigness of God. And I can remember as a little boy just laying on my bed and meditating or kind of thinking about, pondering about what infinity is. And I can just remember laying there and just thinking about what forever actually is. And I encourage everybody that makes prayer a discipline to do that in your prayer. Just imagine infinity and imagine that that's what lies ahead for you and that God is a part of it. I mean, what it does is it puts the difficult things we're going through now in perspective. Everything we're going through now just seems so huge to us, whatever it is you're going through. And it's like, if we can just ponder infinity, ponder something that God has for us that is just, it just goes on forever, it helps us. It just helps us in the troubles. It's just a pinprick, everything we're going through now. It's eternal. What else is heaven like? Jesus compared heaven to a kingdom. Kingdom. That kingdom might not mean much to us now because we don't really have kingdoms the way kingdoms existed in past generations. But what a kingdom means is people. In Revelation 21, the writer John describes heaven coming down as a holy city. So it's like a city. You know what that means? It means there's people there. There's people. We'll be with people in this place. We'll be with people that we've lost. People that we love, people that we'll see again. It's not an isolated thing. It's a communal thing. It's a kingdom. It's hard to imagine. The prophet Isaiah said, "These things no eye has ever seen, no ear has ever heard." But the Bible describes heaven as a kingdom. What else? The Bible describes heaven as being beautiful. What a lovely word, beautiful. You're going to open a door someday. And it's just going to be beautiful. And in Revelation 21, the same author, John, in the same passage, he describes it as, he compares it, and he's just searching for an image, right? Bible writers are just consistently searching for images. And he said, it's going to be beautiful like a bride dressed for her husband. Beautiful like a bride. And I've seen that coming down this aisle so many times. In fact, I have a wedding on Saturday. And that wedding is for Kristen Denbach, the granddaughter of Jope and Laney. And when that bride comes in, however it is they come in, this is a description of what heaven is like. It's beautiful. What else is heaven like? One more word. It's unimaginable. How about that word? Here we are talking about heaven, trying to describe heaven, and the Bible's just clear that it's kind of unimaginable. Isaiah also said, no mind could ever conceive of what God has prepared. So as much as we try to describe, it's unimaginable because what God has prepared is so beautiful and so lovely and so filled with love, our human brains can't yet even understand what it might be like. It's unimaginable. There's a passage in Ezekiel that we've talked about before. Ezekiel and the flying wheel. Ezekiel has this vision, and there's these flying wheels coming across the sky, sort of down from heaven, and they're on fire, and there's eyes in them and animal heads, and there's flying angels, and it's just bizarre. And after we hear that vision, it's like, I have no idea what that vision means. I don't know what it means. But that's the whole point of Ezekiel's vision. Like, there are things of God that we just can't yet imagine. And so part of what heaven is just something that is just beyond us. But we know that it's going to be good, and we know that it's going to be beautiful, and we know that there's going to be people there. And Jesus and Paul say someday the tent's going to come down. This tent is going to come down. We'll take the poles off. It collapses. It's nothing to be afraid of. Something to look forward to. So how does knowing all this affect our lives today? Well, what it does is it gives us hope. It just gives us hope. For all of these things that we're struggling through, every day we can have this hope that there's just a bigger picture and there's just something that's just so much better. And and this is just a rule of life, if there is something joyful you know is coming in the future, if there's something joyful you know is coming, it adds to the joy in life today. And so we have that hope. That's how it affects us. Here's an illustration. I love this. I think this is helpful to me in terms of looking forward to something. Imagine winning $50 million. Not 1 million, not 10 million, 50 million. Imagine you have just won $50 million. Now, I don't buy lottery tickets, and I don't judge people who do. Unless I'm standing behind them in the Circle K lineup, then there might be some judgment. But part of the scenario is this. Think about this. $50 million. Imagine what you could do with that. But there's a catch. You have to wait a year before you get it. You have to wait a year. Now, how would you feel that year you were waiting? I mean, it might be hard in some ways. In some ways it might be hard. But you know what? You would just be filled with hope because you know what's waiting for you. You know what's coming. Like, you could sleep in a ditch that year, knowing that someday you'll be sleeping on silk and satin sheets. Like, you could eat bologna sandwiches every day that year, knowing that there will be a day when you'll have Jamie Oliver as your personal chef. Like, you're filled with hope because you know what's coming in the future. It's the same. The idea of a promise of something good. If we can believe that we have an inheritance that God has waiting for us, it affects our lives today. Even though we know there are tears to cry today and battles left to fight, we know the war has been won. Some of us are fighting battles today. Most of us are fighting some kind of a battle today. But we know that it's done. The war has been won. So we're filled with hope. Now, to finish, Paul says this. And to finish, Jesus says this. There's a potential problem to this. And maybe you can see that problem rising to the surface. Because if we put all our stock in what's to come, if life is just all about heaven in the afterlife, how does that, like, wouldn't we get an attitude, well, what difference does it make how we live today if it's just all about waiting for tomorrow? There's been a criticism over the centuries of the church as being so heavenly minded, they're no earthly good. It's a potential problem. And so we get to this simple line that Jesus teaches. And he taught it in a prayer. And it's a simple line that just gives us an understanding of what heaven is. It just kind of turns everything around so that we can then go and live the lives that he wants us to live. Jesus went to pray. The disciples would see Jesus praying. The disciples would see how it restored Jesus when he prayed. He'd come back to them, and somehow he just had this renewed energy, and they said, teach us to pray as you pray. And Jesus taught them this one definitive prayer that we now call the Lord's Prayer. And the one line in it gives us an understanding of Jesus' view of heaven. And here it is, and you know this, and you know this. God, may your will be done. May that kingdom come. That same kingdom may it come to earth just as it is in heaven. And we're like, what? How? The same kingdom that Isaiah said was beyond our imagining? The same kingdom that is so beautiful that we can't really describe, we just search for images, but it's so beautiful we can't, the same kingdom that just is eternal and lasts forever? And Jesus, you're saying that somehow, and maybe it has something to do with how we live, that kingdom can actually become real now, today? How? How do we do that? And so Paul just puts it really simply, and Paul just says, there are things that you have in your life, and if you share those things you have in your life, the kingdom of heaven comes. How simple is that? There are gifts that you have. There are resources that you have. There are good things that you have that you are surrounded with. And if you share them with people around you, heaven comes to earth. And Jesus said, this is such a huge part of my mission. It's a simple thing to understand, but I've come to earth to try to show you the power of that truth. Jesus said, I lived in heaven. I know what heaven is. Heaven is my home, but I'm here on earth now, and this is what I want to teach you. And if you're my disciples, I expect you to do this. You've all been given talents. You've all been given gifts. You've all been given things, good things. I just want you to share them. Here's how Paul puts it in Romans 12. You've seen this before. Each one of us has different gifts given to us given to us the grace according to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, I know that doesn't really connect with us so well in this generation, then prophesy according with your faith. But then he gets to things that might mean more, might be simpler to understand. If it's serving, I can serve and serve. If it's teaching, I can teach. If it's to encourage, how many of us here, how many of you would say that you have no potential to encourage people around you? I can encourage, then give them encouragement. If it's giving, then give generously. If it's to lead, do it diligently. If it's to show mercy, do it cheerfully. Paul's like, look, it's a long list. Like, I only have so much time, but you get the point. Whatever it is you have, whatever it is, share it. How hard can it be? You know what this is just saying? Shine your light. We learned that when we were kids. Don't hide it under a bush. If we can find ways to continue shining our light in this church, I don't care how bad COVID was. We could do it. Can. So, I mean, we've seen it in this church in simple ways. You see it with the Mother Teresas and the Gandhis and the Martin Luther King Jr.'s and people who made emancipation happen. And you've seen it in all these huge ways, but it just happens in simple ways. Last week we talked about the feeding of the 5,000. where there's all this need around, and the disciples are going, get rid of the need, get rid of the need, and Jesus said, you feed them. And in John's story, John's version of that story, a little boy comes up and shares his lunch. I have something, Jesus, here's what I have. And Jesus takes it, and thousands of people are fed, and the kingdom of heaven comes. We can do it. We have done it. We will do it. That's why this worship is a joyful place. Thanks be to God.